Welcome to the Dungeon Smith, a channel where I talk about all things D&D. For my first couple of episodes, I thought I would start us off by talking about a topic that I always like to discuss, namely Ravenloft. Now, what is Ravenloft? Well, it's a gothic horror setting for Dungeons & Dragons. Basically imagine a world where all your favorite monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, not only run free, but also rule the land. A land of horror and danger while still preserving the essence of D&D. I'm sure if you're watching this, you've heard of the Curse of Strahd. Now that adventure is a reimagining of another old adventure called Ravenloft that was released all the way back in the 80s. That adventure was the inspiration and foundation for what would eventually become the campaign setting of Ravenloft. The actual world where Ravenloft takes place is known more accurately as the Demiplane of Dread. Now within the cosmology of D&D, it exists as a pocket dimension within the ethereal plane. Although in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide it is mentioned that the Demiplane of Dread exists within the Shadowfell. Even though this would be the more current canon for where the plane is located, and I wanted to touch upon it, I'm primarily going to talk about how Ravenloft worked in 2nd edition, since there has yet to be an official campaign guide released for 5th edition. And I have some issues with placing the Demiplane of Dread inside of the Shadowfell. But my feelings on the Shadowfell and how it works is a topic for another day. I might switch on the fly between using the Demiplane of Dread and Ravenloft at different times while talking about the world of the campaign setting. Mostly because the Demiplane of Dread is a bit of a mouthful. But no one in the game would ever actually refer to the world as Ravenloft. As far as anyone living in the world is concerned, that is the name of Strahd's castle in Barovia. Now the Demiplane of Dread is actually quite easy to get to. You can travel there normally by using spells and portals just like you would to any other plane, but the most common way to end up in Ravenloft is by being drawn in by the mists. It's mists with capital M, by the way. The mists are a supernatural phenomena that most often appears as unusually thick mist that exists in between different regions of the Demiplane of Dread, and to some extent seems to be the foundation or building blocks of the plane itself. They can reach into other planes of existence, and anyone that steps into them is magically transported to Ravenloft. Once you end up on the Demiplane of Dread, however, it is almost impossible to leave. No spell can transport you away from the plane. The only other plane you can reach is the Border Ethereal, which is just what it sounds like, the very first layer of the ethereal plane, where ghosts and other creatures exist when they are out of phase with reality. Sometimes temporary portals will open back to the prime material plane, but those are exceedingly rare. The mists can transport you back, but they rarely do so. Anyone who tries to escape that way will most likely just find themselves transported to a different part of the Demiplane of Dread. Now the main reason why it's so hard to leave the Demiplane of Dread is because it's an artificial plane that is essentially designed from the ground up to be a prison to some of the most powerful and evil creatures in all of D&D. No one really knows much about the creators of the plane, but they are generally referred to as the Dark Powers. It is a bit of a misnomer, since, for one, nobody knows how many Dark Powers there are. It could be a single being, and nobody knows for sure that they are evil, although I'm pretty sure they are. In fact, there are even those in the world who doubt they even exist. Although, again, speaking as a DM, they do. We as players and DMs have a lot more evidence of their existence than characters who actually live in the Demiplane of Dread do. I would like to point out also that the vestiges found in the Ember Temple in the Curse of Strahd are not the Dark Powers. The Dark Powers don't have names, they do not communicate directly with anyone, and are completely alien beings of incredible power. You could never trap the Dark Powers in Amber, and you certainly couldn't kill them by smashing it to bits. Now, the Dark Powers may very well be timeless, and for all we know, the Demiplane of Dread could be as well. But the first mention we have of them is roughly 300 years before modern-day Ravenloft. The plane seems to have been created when the vampire Strahd von Sarvich and his country of Barovia was claimed by the Mists, and that sets up a pattern of sorts. The Dark Powers will claim powerful evil creatures, grant them domains to rule over, fill their little kingdoms with people and everything they need to survive, and then leave them to their fates. Now, one might ask why they would do that. Well, to be honest, there isn't a clear answer. But my impression is that the dark powers are fueled by their prisoners' anguish, or take some perverse enjoyment out of torturing evildoers. I'll touch a bit on that later, but the longer the Demon Dread seems to exist, the stronger and larger it grows, becoming more and more complex with time. But let's get back to the domain lords. You see, the domains of the different lords are gilded cages, giving them almost everything they wanted. And that almost is a very big almost. That one thing that the domain lord always wanted will always be kept just outside of reach for them, leaving them constantly frustrated. For example, Strahd constantly searches for the love of his life, Tatiana. But whatever he does, he is doomed to fail to get her. She is constantly being reborn into his domain, but each time he gets close, she is taken away from him. Each domain lord in Ravenloft is incredibly powerful, but unable to leave their domains. Almost every lord has a magical ability that allows them to seal their domain, preventing anyone from traveling in or out of their land. This can take all kinds of forms, but is usually impossible to circumvent. So if you anger a domain lord, they can pretty much trap you within their domain and force a confrontation. The first domains that were created were formed in the demiplane, and they were separated and isolated from each other by the mists. But as time went by, they sort of started to drift together. Most of the known domains in Ravenloft now form a single continent, usually called the core, which means that on most days you can travel between different realms on foot, just like you would travel between kingdoms in Faerun. For the most part, the domains of the core share similar climates and cultures, and the domain lords of those lands are called the Dark Lords, and in general they are the most powerful of all the lords of Ravenloft. Other domains that share similar climates, cultures, or histories have drifted together to form other continents, referred to as clusters. There is, for example, a desert cluster called the Amber Wastes, and there's a jungle cluster called the Steaming Lands. There are still some domains that exist isolated out in the mists, called Islands of Terror, and there's also a special category of domains called pockets. They're essentially domains that exist within other domains, such as a single house that holds a lord of its own existing within a city on the core. Now that we have a basic grasp of the hows and whys of Ravenloft, let's talk a bit about some of the mechanics that separated a Ravenloft game from your average session of D&D. First, we have the tech level. Although many Ravenloft domains are medieval, just like your average D&D world, there are several domains that are closer to a Renaissance level technology. In fact, I would say that many domains come close to a 17th or 18th century of technology. Not entirely surprising, considering that Ravenloft is inspired by Gothic literature like Frankenstein and Dracula. The higher technology means that several places in the Demiplane where you can get a hold of firearms and things such as gaslight is not unheard of. The second major difference relates to magic and psionics. There are countless spells that function differently in Ravenloft. For starters, spells that allow interdimensional travel do not work. Necromancy in general is a lot stronger in Ravenloft, and undead are also empowered and much harder to detect in Ravenloft than in other settings. Also, clerics do not receive spells from their gods. They believe they do, but gods cannot actually interfere with the Demiplane. Instead, the dark powers grant clerics their spells, masquerading as gods to the NPCs, or to the PCs. Going through every single spell that works differently would take ages, so I'm not going to do that now, but it's safe to say that since the Demiplane of Dread is an artificial construct with its own laws of nature, magic works slightly different than in Faerun, for example. Another large difference between Ravenloft and other D&D settings was the addition of rules for fear, horror, and madness. Back in 2nd edition, these took the shape of saving throws. Fear generally being rolled when in mortal danger, while terror usually related more to otherworldly sights or dangers. Then there was the mechanic of power checks and corruption. In the immortal words of Harvey Dent, you either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain. And that sentiment is very much true in Ravenloft. Each time you perform an evil or immoral act, and that can include the casting of any a few dozen spells, as defined as evil by the way, you had to roll a percentile roll to see if your character was corrupted by his brush with evil. If you failed the roll, then your character has caught the eye of the dark powers. Each time your character failed, they would grow a little bit more corrupt. The DM selected a monster that your character would slowly start to transform into. So if your DM had decided that your warrior prone to bloodlust was slowly being turned into a vampire, You might notice after a few failed rolls that you start preferring your steaks extra rare. Your complexion will start to grow paler, and your skin might be cold to the touch, as life is slowly leaving you. It was an interesting system, although a little flawed. Not every Dark Lord in Ravenloft, after all, is a monster, and they are definitely fully corrupted. And the last mechanic that set Ravenloft apart from other settings was curses. Basically, anyone in Ravenloft has the power to call upon the dark powers to curse someone. It's not something that usually works, but the more tragic and compelling the curse and the situation surrounding it was, the greater the chance of success would be. The dark powers love dramatic irony. In the end, a curse would come down to a percentage roll based on the situation and the wording of the curse, but it was something that could lead to some interesting RP situations, as a dying player cursed a powerful NPC, or even someone in the group if they felt vindictive enough. Again, curses had a pretty big chance of attracting the attention of the dark powers. After all, you're calling out directly to them, so they would involve a power roll. That, and the fact that they rarely actually worked, made them pretty hard to abuse. Well, so that would be a quick introduction and explanation of Ravenloft. Hopefully you found some of it interesting. There's way more to talk about Ravenloft than what I can fit into a single video. So if any of you have any questions or want me to talk more in depth about any single aspect of Ravenloft, then write a comment below. In my next video I'll be going into detail about how to actually run a Ravenloft game in 5th edition. I'm going to talk about how to convert over some of those features that make Ravenloft, and things such as which monsters you can use. The video should be up already, and I'll leave a link in the description. Until next time, Dungeon Delvers. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, then please leave a like down below, it really helps out a lot. And if you want to see more, don't forget to press the bell icon so you'll be receiving notifications whenever I upload new content. If you want to support the channel, then you can share this video with your friends, or you can check out my Dungeon Master's Guild products. You can also follow me on Twitter, or you can check out my Tumblr, where I'll be posting logs of the different Dungeons & Dragons campaigns that I run. Links to all that in the description. My channel is still new, so if you have any suggestions for topics, then please let me know. I would love to know what D&D topics excite you.